The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are only those of the speaker and do not represent the views and opinions of any other than them who said them. Welcome to episode 6 of 1H. 1H is a platform intended to help people share their thoughts and ideas regarding decentralized education, leadership, technology, and analysis. 1H is hosted on the Gridcorn Discord server every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 1 a.m. UTC, and everyone is welcome to join in the conversations through the Discord chat. 1H episodes will be no longer than 75 minutes, though they may be shorter depending on how many speakers and subjects are scheduled for the episode. For now, each episode is broken into 3 20-minute blocks, which can be reserved by individuals or groups who wish to explore a subject. To reserve a block, reach out to Jay Ringo in the Gridcorn Discord server or in the Gridcorn Slack with the subject you wish to discuss and the participants who intend to speak. To qualify for a time slot, you or a participant must have written and published something at least somewhat covering what you intend to speak about. There are 3 rules when it comes to broadcasting on 1H. You can talk about a project, but only if you're using it as an example to illustrate the idea behind the project. The focus of any subject should somehow be related to decentralized education, leadership, technology, or analysis, and swearing and vulgarity is not permitted. I do ask that unless otherwise suggested by the speaker of the block, please hold all questions and comments until the end when the speaker will open the discussion up to everyone. And last but not least, 1H is meant to evolve as a community project. Suggestions and ideas are always welcome. So the fire is lit and the hearth is warm. Let's get underway. So for episode 6 this week, we were going to talk about open source, but we had someone come up and reserve a block, so we are going to let them present instead, and open source will likely be the subject next week. So this week we have Openwords with us, who will be discussing Open Educational Resources, OER, and his project called Openwords, and you can find Openwords at openwords.com. So I'm just going to toss this right over to Openwords and let him get things started.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. So Openwords and OER. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about OER today? OER is really just, in a lot of senses, it's just an example of open source, but in the education space. OER stands for Open Educational Resources. And it means basically openly licensed educational resources. So I got a good definition from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for the term. Basically means teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. Open educational resources include full courses, course materials, modules, textbooks, streaming videos, tests, software, and any other tools, materials, or techniques used to support access to knowledge. So the history of OER, I think we really would start with open source. And openly licensed code, because that preceded OER. The term dates back to, it was adopted by the United Nations, UNESCO in 2002. I think it was termed around 2000. An important event in the development of OER was something called MIT OpenCourseware in 1999. And essentially what happened is MIT made a lot of their courses just in the public domain, open source. And so they took a number of open licenses, which I think you guys will talk about next week, and applied them to their course, basically to their courses. So, okay, what does open mean in this context? Well, it really means free as in freedom. It can also mean free as in beer. So David Wiley is a gentleman who in the late 90s and until today was a leader in the OER movement. He might have come up with the term OER. I can't remember, but he did come up with the 4 or 5 REs, the REs: reuse, revise, remix, redistribute. This is a good description of what you can do with OERs. So unlike closed or proprietary educational material, with open educational resources, you have the legal right to reuse material. You're able to take old OER material and adapt it. You can revise it. You can remix it, and most importantly, you can redistribute it without fear of copyright violation, because it's explicitly copylefted. So in terms of what is the value of OER, I think of there being three things, broad categories. One is intrinsic value. It's really nice to have some things in the public domain. Not everything needs to be private property. And for a long time, we've been comfortable with the notion that equations or certain kinds of intellectual, creative understandings or goods are to be in the public domain. And the OER movement really just places a lot of educational material into the public domain. And some people, like myself, would just view that as a good thing. Something like calculus, for example, was invented or discovered over 300 years ago, and yet there are still massive textbooks that cover that material and are still being sold for a large amount of money. So a reasonable question could be, well, why? Because calculus was invented by someone who's been dead for a long time. Another reason why I think OERs and others think OERs are valuable is the practical value that comes from an OER. If you have the legal right to manipulate the content in whatever way you need, then you can adapt it to your particular circumstances. You can change the material for your particular classroom. You can also just steal, which is always really handy. So if something is openly licensed, whether it's a textbook or a series of slides, you can just take it and adapt it for your classroom. And that's really useful, and it doesn't cost anything. Which brings us to the third area of value with OERs, and that is cost. So OERs are not completely free, as in beer. They're not completely free because they do have to be created sometimes. Sometimes they have to be organized, and that takes effort. So you do have to develop revenue models to support that. But in the long run, it can save money because you're basically removing a restriction on the ability to share material. So what are some of the organizations that support OER? There are a number. There are the OER Commons. OpenStax is a group. That's OpenStax is a group that creates peer-reviewed, high-quality OER textbooks. There's OER Digest, where you can sign up and just learn about the new things that are going on in the OER space. And as a geographer myself, I really like, and this is a good place to get started with OER, you can go to the OER World Map. I think that's oerworldmap.org. And that is literally just a world map that shows a bunch of different OER institutions and groups around the world. And here you can actually kind of see that the two big leaders in OER, or at least as it appears from from space seem to be the United States and Germany, but you'll also see that there are OER groups around the world. This has been moving, OER has been moving really, I think, exponentially. There was a study a few years ago that suggested only less than a third of American college educators were even aware of OER, but that's changing very quickly. OER also has a lot of political aspects to it, and we can talk about that if you want. One movement that's taking up steam right now is this notion that if you have public dollars supporting the production of technology or educational material, then it should be public intellectual goods. So the phrase is public dollars, public code, or public dollars, public content. And so these movements are taking hold in people's imagination throughout the fields of education. And I suspect that they will take hold and grow. And that's one of the predictions underlying Openwords, which is the group that I direct. Now, I can talk a little bit about Openwords. I'm curious if I should go over, if you have any questions about OER at this point.
I definitely, this is my first real experience with OER. I've heard the term before. I knew a little bit about it, but I'm now, the connection you drew with open source, and I just see it so clearly now. Open source, open access, even the idea of public funds, public content. We've talked about it a little bit here, where it's like with open access, if the public is funding the science, then the data and information from that gained from that science is public content. It's theirs. They paid for it. They have it. And I think that's just a connection I never made with education before. And I think that's a pretty neat connection. And then my second response is the way you talked about how money is involved with it. I can connect that to open source in that it's the code itself is free beer, but the organization and the support structure is where the money's made. So you have like Red Hat, for example. They became a thing because they provided support to open sourced code software, and they've done very well because of it. So it's not like you have to make money by building this educational content. You can make money by being the person who supports this educational content and helps organize it for specific entities, and just works that way. It's not the content that is of value. It's the way we interact with it almost.
Yeah, actually, it's a good point. And so I'm looking through, you sent me a number of questions about OER, and they were really helpful in organizing thoughts to talk today. And one of your questions is about money and how we can fund OER. And it is actually an issue. So since OER really is a new term and is rapidly spreading through education consciousness, actually all of the methods of financing OER are not solidified. People are exploring. But one thing, let's talk about Red Hat for a minute. One thing, and technology companies in general, one thing that's interesting here is actually, in a sense, what I want to do, and other OER organizations want to do, is return to a more standard model of making money. So think about a company making chairs. Now, a chair company doesn't make money by owning the concept of a chair. Instead, a chair is something that we all possess commonly. You wouldn't call a chair, the concept of a chair, open source, but it's essentially what it is. And so that's essentially what we want to do. We want to work, in our case, Openwords, we want to work with universities to build educational material, basically tailored to their needs. And the end result is OER, so it becomes publicly available. And what we are saying to our potential clients at this moment is we stand beside our code and beside the educational content that we create, not in front of it.
So you create, a main confusion point I have with this is what is coursework? What is a course? So what is the stuff you're making? And it sounds like you're making, so you have a geographer, for example, and they have a specific course they're teaching, and they don't want to pay the upfront fee for this company that put together a textbook and is selling it for thousands of dollars. So they would come to you and you would create coursework for them based on their specific needs. And then once that coursework is created, anyone can take it and change it to fit their specific needs. And then if they need help in that process, they'd come back to you. Or do you get paid upfront for the coursework you make, or where does that fit in?
Well, we haven't ironed everything out, but yeah, essentially that's what we would be. We would be collaborators in building the curricula that they need. And they could view it as essentially a long-term investment in cost savings, because it would be free for them moving farther down the line. So that's one idea.
So I actually have a question, just to kind of get your idea on this. And that's, you mentioned that and a lot of this is going to, some college professors have never heard of it, right? You mentioned that only 30% have, I believe. And then also that this would probably be geared towards a lot of like college students and people who have to deal with a lot of textbooks. So do you see an issue with the current paradigm where college professors are the actual ones writing the textbooks and selling it? And selling it to their own students. So like in the college that I went to, it was extremely common. If it happened I believe in my case, in probably more than 50% of my classes, the teacher that I had either had a coworker who wrote the textbook or wrote the textbook themselves. And the school advertised that textbook as the coursework. Like, we have the specialist who wrote the book, right? And so some higher level colleges will push that textbook because that's notoriety for their school, right? And so I guess my question is, do you see that as a big hindrance, or do you guys have a response to that specific scenario that I've seen a lot in higher education?
Yeah, we do have a response. I mean, if there's anything that I have trouble with, is that usually I've got too many things going on in my head and trying to, but I would say one big response is, these professors already have a salary, so frequently. And so in terms of a revenue model for them, they've got one. So one response is take out the violin, but that's not really that's a more of an aggressive response. I think maybe another response would be, there are alternative revenue models. And so that could potentially benefit the instructor building the textbook.
Yeah, and I mean, your first point is fairly valid, right? Like, I mean, it is realistically speaking, a lot of the guys who are writing textbooks are fairly high up in their field, and the college isn't giving them a base salary. Like, if you're capable of writing and producing a full textbook for your field, you're probably making on like mid to higher end of a college professor's salary, which, you know, it's not pennies, right? But the other thing I think of is if you make it open source, are you dissuading the people who would be considered experts in their field? Would they be the ones to ever really contribute to that, or would they still be trying to push their own private market? Because I really like your idea. I always just wonder, it's like, these are kinds of the things that I see, and I'm wondering, how would you get around that, more or less?
Well, yeah, I think it is a problem, actually, but I think the problem is the perception of what's valuable, what is a good incentive to the instructor writing the textbook. there is actually, at this point, the people studying OER have needed to do a lot of research to show that this new model of intellectual property in the education space is good for everybody. And for example, there's a lot of evidence that if you do, and this is true for open access as well, if you do make something open access or open source, or in this case, OER, your material is going to go around more broadly. And what that essentially allows you to do is cash in many other ways. So this could include consulting or the speaking circuit, but from the scientist or the engineer or the humanities professor or whatever, if they get their work out more broadly, there are other ways to capitalize on that financially, and that's the bottom line. And I think there are just a lot of different ways. So I couldn't point necessarily to one, but maybe I've listed a few.
So one thing you did mention, which actually, or at least led me to think, would one really cool takeaway that anyone could have by publishing in this would actually be the notoriety, right? Your name would be spread much more heavily in an area where the book was free, and they contributed, than in a situation where you're trying to sell it at a store, right? So in a way, it would be a really easy way for anyone who wanted to get a boost in their initial career, or someone who is more isolated, to help spread and get their name out more. I see that as a real big draw for a lot of producers of it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And another issue is, I think that honestly, a lot of academics have really good intentions. So a lot of them do, provided they have their core salary taken care of, do want to contribute to OER, and once they understand what it is. But let me talk a little bit more about possible financial models that could be incentives to them. And the reality is we're building them as we talk. So not all of these things have been implemented. So first of all, let's talk about Openwords as an example. Openwords is not a textbook. Openwords is more comparable to something like Babbel or Rosetta Stone or Duolingo. It is a web application where you can take a variety of different kinds of problems. Okay, conjugation, hearing, sentence construction or sentence translation, also vocabulary, things like that. So Openwords is not really aiming to replace classrooms, but you can see that an instructor, rather than having worksheets, might have a series of Openwords lessons that complement and support the classroom. Okay, so one of the models that was actually handed to us by Creative Commons, that was the following. Let's say we have a lot of users at a university through taking Openwords lessons, in conjunction with a classroom setting. Well, the Openwords web app is completely free and open source. The use of it is free. And if you want to follow yourself, you can follow yourself. But if you are a large university with an endowment and you want to follow 5,000 students, well, that's private information, right? So it should be closed. That's something to keep in mind. When we're talking about open educational resources, we don't want the student performance on those open educational resources to be publicly available and open to everybody. And so this is a place where Openwords as an institution can take a place where the data is supposed to be closed, which students did well on these lessons and which students did really poorly. And we can ask universities or corporations that have sufficient revenue or funding to pay a subscription for that, and thereby fund an open educational resource producing organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're paying for data that will help them achieve their goals.
Yeah, and this is also a place where we wouldn't have to restrict this to anybody. So, if there was an institution where their government wasn't funding them appropriately, we could just provide gratuitous access to that data. If you just want to implement it with 20 students individually, we could make that available for free. But why am I sharing this model? Well, this is in part to answer that question that you had a little while ago. There are ways of making this making revenue from making something open, and and so the person building the curricula could be one of the individuals incentivized from that revenue. And we don't know what percentage would go to the instructor building a course, and what percentage would go to Openwords. Because we have expenses as well, but that possibility is there. So actually, we took part in something called the Open Business Model Canvas, which was an activity run by Creative Commons where everybody involved just brainstormed 1,000 different ideas about how to generate revenue while making sure that the core, or even 100% of your technology, is openly licensed. And what I was, to be honest, surprised to find is that there really are 1,000 different ways to make money, and many without putting a wall around an idea. And they're very varied, and it depends on the business, but they're there. And just putting a wall around an idea is really the dumbest thing to do. It's the easiest thing to think of. And so in a sense, that's why a lot of technology companies do it. But I think Red Hat, there's another OER company called Lumen Learning. That's David Wiley's company. Lots of companies they do make money successfully.
Doesn't the CEO of Microsoft doesn't Bill Gates have like an open textbook resource where he bought the licenses for a ton of textbooks and posted them online?
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch some of the tech leaders. Bill Gates was initially didn't really like, I might be mistaken here, so I apologize to Bill Gates if he ever hears this, but I think he might have been initially opposed to open source, but over time people are seeing the value of that. And part of the reason I'm assuming, this is speculation, conjecture, is because they can see that there are organizations like Red Hat that do, and even Google, that either are entirely open source or have a large portion of their technology open source.
I can speak to that history really quick. So you can go back and you can read this letter. It's called An Open Letter to Hobbyists. Bill Gates wrote it in 1976 when this conversation was happening with the free software movement before it was open source. So this conversation about how to make money without putting a wall around an idea has been going on for decades. And he basically advocated for proprietary software. And he put a letter out to all these people who advocated for free software, free, not free beer software. And he eventually, he ended up building Microsoft, and then these other people who advocated for free software kept doing what they did, and they ended up building companies that are more powerful than Microsoft right now. So as a result of it, like the examples are Red Hat and Cygnus. So the result of that was Bill Gates 2000, 2001, created a pseudo open source system for some stuff. Sort of, it felt like it was a way to save face, but who knows his real intentions. But I'm just, Chocolate, you've been trying to speak for a while. Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead. I just had a question for Openwords.
I was going to push this into cryptocurrency, and I'm wondering how your Openwords, how you're thinking of using cryptocurrency in this model moving forward.
Okay, sure. Well, this is a good segue. I'll segue in from another way to make money. One way a lot of corporations, enterprises make money in this world is they just get contracts for governments. So that's certainly true for weapons manufacturers. And what we would like it to be true for as well is for organizations building open educational resources. And actually, there seems to be some progress there. A lot of governments around the world are, many of them are making statements in support of OER, which is nice, but actually some governments are putting money there and actually putting investments into OER. And so Openwords is talking to university systems and and indirectly to governments that want to make investments into OER. So as we're talking to these different organizations that want to invest in OER, maybe they have some money that they can supply to build OERs, but maybe it's not quite as much as they want. Maybe they have $4 million and what they really need is $80 million for the production. And so what I'm imagining at this moment, I don't know if it's true, is that maybe we can use cryptocurrency in some way to finance the production of OERs. One idea, and this is what I'd like to talk to you guys about, is maybe if an organization such as a university has computing power, but only $4 million earmarked for OER development, maybe we could offer a contract where we reduce the amount that they pay in US dollars by some percentage, 10%, 20%, something like that, and then ask to be paid in cryptocurrency, or ask for them to lease some portion of their computing power in order to mine a cryptocurrency like Vertcoin or Monero, or the science coins like Gridcoin, Folding Coin, or something like that. This is very attractive just because if they're mining, or not mining, but minting, if they're doing scientific calculations and earning science coins, they're doing something that's part of the university mission, and they're creating coins that they can hand to us that we can use to fund our operations. Qualitatively, it sounds like it makes sense. The thing that I am not sure would work is just whether or not they could mine enough or mint enough or earn enough with the machines that they have.
So I think that's a great idea. Regarding whether or not they can mint enough, it depends on how much the coin is worth at the time. So being such a young market in cryptocurrencies right now, everything's very volatile, and it's hard to estimate smoothly what they would need to mint in order to actually make an equivalent US dollar income to fund OER, because I'm assuming you will be paying people and paying your expenses with fiat. So it's a question of whether the coin is profitable in terms of how much electricity they need to spend to mint the coins. And when it comes to universities, I'm assuming they have a lot of computing resources. So if they direct those at something like Gridcoin or Folding Coin or CureCoin, they will almost undoubtedly make a significant amount of it. It's just whether that amount would be worth $10 or $10,000 or $10 million. If you're talking about reducing the cost they have to pay to you because they're paying in cryptocurrency, you can factor in, if the coin is not profitable based on electricity costs, you might be able to factor in by how much into how much you reduce the overall cost to you, sort of thing. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I do follow that exactly, but I can say this: it's possible. It's possible that it doesn't need to be profitable. In other words, the science, particularly if it's a science coin and not something like Monero, the energy expended is actually purposeful, and yeah, they don't need to make a profit to deliver us coins.
It's almost like they're them continuing to or working to complete their educational mission by working on these science coins is almost part of the profit. They get the notoriety, they get the publicity, and they actually advance education.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And actually, I should say something. So, in the period of time since I started thinking about this idea, actually, we've seen a few throughout the mainstream media, some attention to the notion that internet companies could make money by having their end users, in this case, mine some cryptocurrency. So in our case, just as you described, the mining would actually be part of the profit, in a sense. One way to think about it is you're creating positive externalities while financing. So I think it would be newsworthy if it worked at all. The only real there's a couple of concerns that I have. One, who's in control of the computers, and are they the same person or part of the university that needs the OER, and how is that going to be a problem? That's one problem. There's another problem, but I can't think of it right now.
I think this is such a great idea, and that problem itself, I think, has solutions to it. But like you said at the beginning of this is just like you're making this as we're talking about it right now. This is so new, and it's a new business model. It's a new business idea. At Gridcoin, we're thinking of we're discussing a treasury system in a way to maybe allow minters of Gridcoin to automatically send some Gridcoin to a third party. So, for example, I mint 10 Gridcoin by working on this one Boink project, and then I decide I want to send one of those Gridcoin to an OER development course. So that would allow individuals to also donate to OER resources and OER organizations like Openwords. And then if the university was in control of their computers, they could almost, if we had that implemented, they could do it almost automatically, where they mine all the coins and the protocol itself automatically sends those coins to the Openwords wallet, and Openwords then does whatever they want. And then the alternative right off the bat is what you mentioned earlier, where they would lease the computers to a third party almost, which would be another way to use OER and crypto to make another business where you go around and lease computers and then do what the university wants with them, so they don't need to handle the computer resources.
Yeah, I think that's right. Those are all slightly different, but they all entail the computer resources being leveraged to pay for yet another thing. In this case, OER. And so the big problems are strangeness. It's weird. I think that can be overcome by the fact that the media is starting to cover this, and what was initially strange may actually be a benefit, because it would be something that would be newsworthy. And I think universities like positive coverage. But one of the big problems will be deploying it. if for example, a language department has 100 computers, it needs to be deployed in a relatively straightforward manner. A simple installation of perhaps a program that runs in the background. It needs to maybe only run in the evening when the computers are not being used by students for the, in the language classes, let's say. And maybe it shouldn't run at 100% of CPU, but some fraction of that, just so the computers don't overheat. So there are these kinds of complications, and definitely programs that are easy to install and have a light footprint, understanding the computers are used for other purposes, that would be what we need. And so it's likely that other coins at first have some of those capabilities. And then over time, we could develop it for what I think are more valuable coins, such as the science coins, or coins like Mana, which is a universal basic income coin. So I sort of think of these coins as social coins or science coins, but they all have a positive output in mind.
Yeah, and I know Jay Ringo definitely wants to comment on this, but I had two comments. One is to the point you just made. I feel like you're literally just listing off the features of like Boink, right? The whole basis of what Gridcoin is, right? It's a simple install that you can actually configure to say only use when my CPU is lower than 20%, like pretty much when it's idle. Only use when it's idle. Turn off when someone's using the computer. You can pick hours in the day that you tell it to compute. Like the Boink manager will fully manage all of these specifications that you actually mentioned. Like the complications are actually already built into the software. And then the other thing is, and you kind of actually answered, you actually kind of mentioned my point, which was, I think that walking into a school and saying, if you do this, right, if you help fund this OER, you can effectively go to the local news station and say, we're the local college. All of our textbooks and material are free. And we also do side processing for scientific research. And if that doesn't make people want to sign up for the school, especially people with income issues or people who normally would have a monetary barrier for that education like facility, I mean, that's huge, right? If suddenly you go to apply to a college and you're like, oh, all my textbooks are technically online for free and open source, and that's a huge expense off my shoulders. And also I know that my college is doing processing for good, and I could even submit data sets to them if I needed to have processing, right?
And to roll off that, you're absolutely right. Boink does these things already, and they even have a couple distributions that are built for large-scale installations. So I wouldn't say they're simple. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of making Boink user-friendly. But because it's open source, you can also go to these universities and say, we can help you set up this initial software, which isn't the most difficult thing in the world. It's just also not the easiest thing in the world, which has all these features that you just listed off. And then at the same time, you can use your software department, your computer science department, to improve Boink. You can make that part of your coursework. And you can say, we need, because that's what open source is, right? Someone takes the software and then changes it to fit their exact needs. So you can say to them, these are your exact needs. Here is the software for Boink. Put it into your course and have all these students who are learning to code learn to code by improving Boink and building a specific build for that university. And then that university can have a let's just say Columbia. You can have the Columbia build of Boink, where it fits Columbia's very specific needs for what they need to do with their computing problems.
Yeah, and Jiringo, just if you didn't already know this, I've gone to a couple IT departments at some colleges, and what a lot of them actually do, I think the program, if I remember correctly, is called Frozen Ropes, is one adaptation of it, and it's literally just a versioning software that you have all of the computers that are the college owned, and they just have one version, right? So when they set up all these other computers, they literally just hit a go button, and it's so if they have to do a mass software update, you pretty much send the image to all the computers. So if they were to install Boink or a program, they don't go and install it on every single computer. They install it on the one version and then pretty much hit a populate. So installing Boink, you'd pretty much give it to one software guy who probably knows what he's doing. I mean, Boink's fairly simple to figure out if you have any background in IT, and he would install it properly and then just hit a go button, and it would spread to actually all the computers. So it's actually even more simple than I think we're already like explaining it. But
So, Openwords, I had a question going back to a point that Emma and Maddie made earlier about OER seems like a rebranding of public libraries. Education has always been cheap. Proof of an education is a very different thing. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on the so one thing is providing an education. The other thing is verifying that that person has actually learned. Do you have any thoughts about open source exams that could in that obviously it could come in many forms, but something that would give a certificate that says this person has correctly learned this. Like AP and IB exams come to mind, but something along those lines.
Oh, that's a really big question. I do have thoughts on that issue, and let me say three things. One, that's a decision. That's something that the entire society, the entire civilization is going to have to process. It's a really big question. Two, I think that there's a really important place for learning institutions with big buildings and professionals and even classrooms and human-to-human interaction. So I wouldn't throw that out just right away. But three, a lot of these technologies are like MOOCs, massively online and open courses, technology like language learning applications where a lot of the learning can be done as an autodidact. All of these technologies have huge potential, and they also have huge potential in terms of validating and making assessments on what has been learned. Everything that Edward Snowden talked about in terms of surveillance of everybody doing everything. I don't know, it's not everybody doing everything, but it's a lot. All of that potential in these machines can also be used to, for example, track every instance of every single learner distributed across the planet on every single problem and every single learning exercise. And so you can really get an assessment of whether or not they've learned, let's say, a certain level of proficiency of a language. And maybe that's what's needed. It depends on let's say what an employer may need. An employer may just simply need to know, can the person speak Cantonese, for example? So the answer is I don't know. Part of the answer is it's not entirely my decision. It's something that we're all going to have to think together. The big institutions and the big degrees, I think, are still going to matter for a while for a lot of reasons, but there are huge opportunities for direct and absolutely completely zero cost assessment of what learning has occurred.
So you're on board with Gridcoin University?
So what did you think about what Goblin and I were saying about how Boink sort of already achieves, satiates these concerns of yours about how these universities could use these programs, and then the idea of even using the university's own computer science department to build a university-specific Boink build?
That is going to be harder for me to understand because I'll need to understand Boink more deeply than I do right now. However, while you were talking about that, gears were turning in my head about how I'm going to approach particular universities, such as Indiana University, which is the big university that I come from, and how exactly am I going to propose that we deploy Boink, for example. And so what I'd hope to do, rather than answer that question now, which I don't think I'm prepared to do, I'd like to know who to talk to deepen my understanding a little bit.
Sure. Have you set up the software on like your personal computer or anything?
No, I've been doing mining of other currencies so far, but not Boink.
I would recommend setting up Boink, and then just hang around the Discord. You can PM me or anyone here. Would be happy to help you. We have enough knowledge on it. But you'll notice that there are features, like Goblin was saying, that do let you make, for example, Boink will automatically shut off when someone moves the mouse, or you can say only use up to 60% of a CPU, so it's not running at 100% all the time.
Yeah, that's a.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. Yeah, that's all fantastic. I mean, I think that's absolutely exactly what's needed. I have, for the most part, thought about the computers being used at night, but I suppose they could also be used during the day, just not when a student is using it. And I have thought about. I've also thought about the fact that there is a centralized control for many of the computers, and which is a point that someone else made. So all of that's really interesting information, and it makes it sound more plausible to do. And as far as I can tell, it seems like it's the human factor here that's going to be limiting. Can we communicate this in a way that makes people want to do it? So one thing that I learned from this conversation is that I need to talk to the computer scientists at Indiana University. That makes sense?
Yeah, they'll definitely be able to help you.
So I sort of agree with that comment in that you definitely need the IT people on board, because just like any DBA, talking to a computer scientist who runs the IT in a college is there to protect his baby, right? Like, you walking up to him and telling him, hey, you should put the software on there, it's probably not going to go over super well. I think actually one of the first people you need to talk to is probably the administration or the head of marketing or something like that. Not the marketing department, like marketing major, but the actual college marketing teams, and the college financing teams, because effectively this is free advertising. Like, you could say, hey, get on board with this. Not every one of your teachers has to do it. But if there's one or two teachers in here that believes in open source education or open sourcing their textbooks, then why not, right? You can go down and totally publicize that textbooks. Many of our classrooms offer free textbooks, right? And if you do the Gridcoin or you do any crypto, it's the free marketing. It's that you can then advertise on your paper. We do processing. We're ahead of the times. Like, I mean, everyone's heard the story of Long Island Bitcoin, right? Or Long Bitcoin, or whatever the company changed its name to. A company, Long Island Iced Tea, changed its ticker name, its company name, to Long Bitcoin, and their stock went from like $1 to $10 in a day, for no other reason than just being able to mention that they maybe possibly sort of got involved in blockchain. So it's Long Island blockchain. Excuse me. So I mean, I think the real value that you provide these places and the reason and the call to action for them is the free marketing, right? And when you talk to a finance team, as much as offering open education is always a really cool thing, most of the people in administrations in colleges are driven by the books, right? And to be very realistic. And so I think throwing that out there of the free marketing, the free advertising, the way you can position yourself by using this is probably the fastest and easiest way to get a lot of the higher ups to buy in.
That's fantastic. So that really gives me clear direction. So
I'm in sales, by the way. That's my background. So that's why, yes.
So we do have the people, let's say in a few universities, actually, there are the people in the language departments, in language technology departments that are on our side. And they are really just figuring out how to persuade their administration to do any kind of buy-in, whether it be, for the most part, it was financial. But this gives me a clear idea that maybe we could do it by first contacting the Indiana Daily Student or the marketing department of the university, discussing the story, sharing the stories that have been written in the mainstream media about similar things, and maybe even speaking to people outside of the university, but in the press, to acquire evidence that the press would be interested in such a story. And then I could bring that back to the university administrators. Right now, actually, one of the things we're doing is we're just trying to get them to sign on to OER. Depends on the university. Some of them are already on board with that.
I'm gonna, if I could make an assumption, and just I'm going to assume that a lot of the colleges that are already on OER are smaller colleges or larger community colleges.
I think that's actually, I'd say that isn't true. There is a group called I think there is a OER Community College Network. So community colleges are definitely on it, right? And they're on it for the reasons related to cost, which you guys talked about. But since there are actually lots of different reasons for OER coming from many different directions, I think you're seeing other kinds of universities and other groups supporting it as well. So there are community colleges, that's one. Another is the global, let's say the quote unquote, the global South. Developing countries are becoming interested in it, but for the same reason, costs. But then you also have, like, for example, I think I mentioned MIT. So MIT is, an elite college, and they were one of the first to push it forward. And really what they were doing is that they were doing innovation in, how our society and how our educational system works. So, yes, the community colleges are an important driver here. There are drivers everywhere. And this is actually one of the reasons why I set up an organization in this space, is because I can see, a tidal flow coming for a lot of different reasons.
I agree. And we are coming up on an hour here. So if anyone has any ideas or last thoughts about OER using cryptocurrency for funding, speak now.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, just wanted to say thank you to all of you guys for the conversation. It's been really enlightening. And I'm available anytime you want to connect with me. We're Openwords is openwords.com. You can contact us from there. We also operate on Twitter @Openwords. And so I don't have any closing remarks, but other than thanks for the conversation, guys.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for coming. This has been great. I personally learned a lot about OER, something that I didn't know that I agreed with so much. And it's going to fit in great next week with our talk on open source. So you guys should come back next week. We're going to have a great talk. And I want to remind everyone that if you want to reserve a block, you're more than welcome to reach out to me on the Gridcoin Discord server. And we'll get you all set up with a block. You can do 20 minutes, 40 minutes, or you can do an entire block if it's a subject that you want to really dive into. Other than that, I guess that'll be it for this week. So we will catch you next week.